What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap podcast. I've been waiting to record this one since the era of James Harden has begun with the Sixers. James is not here tonight, but with me I got my guy Harrison Grimm, who is a staff writer for the Liberty Ballers and has an awesome, uh, uh, my bad, awesome newsletter. My bad, drew a blank on that, but above the Grimm. So make sure you check that out. Harrison, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I think it's funny with your intro. I was thinking like, which James are we talking about? Your co-host or James Harden? But it's been great. The team's been fun to watch as of late. There's a ton of fun stuff to talk about. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, definitely. And before we jump right into it, I want to talk about our partner, BetUS, which is official sponsor of the Pick Swap podcast. BetUS has been in the industry for 25 years, is the leading online sportsbook and casino in the market. So make sure to log on to betus.pa and use promo code PickSwap as a first-time depositor to cash in on some really great opportunities. Sixers covered the -8 yesterday. I cashed in on a James Harden over 41.5 points, rebounds, and assists, and on Embiid at 46.5 points, rebounds, assists. So pretty much whatever the line's looking like against the Knicks on Wednesday, I think is looking pretty friendly to me. So Harrison, to jump right into it now, what is your number one takeaway from just these first two games with James Harden?
Yeah, I mean, limiting it to one takeaway is so hard. I mean, there's so much to talk about. But I think the biggest takeaway or the biggest story so far has been how impressive the Embiid and Harden partnership has looked. Now, there's concerns heading into this that, they're a good fit together, but there's certainly things that they do or don't do that kind of contradict each other. And it hasn't really been much of a problem. They've kind of just winged the whole pick and roll thing, and it's looked really good. Harden is just such a talented passer. And Embiid has been such a willing screen setter, even when Harden is off the floor. Now he's setting screens for Maxi because Doc kind of rotates around the minutes. He's been setting screens with such a high frequency, even more than what we saw when he was partnered with Jimmy Butler. And sure, there's definitely some kinks to work out. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to be perfect this season? We'll see. But I think that's the biggest takeaway from it all is those two have just looked phenomenal with each other.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'll say it looks a lot closer to perfect than I expected to at this point. And as far as Embiid specifically, he looks kind of like re-energized as a screener, and that's really been an area of his game that since coming in the league has been one of the more lacking as far as the attributes that he's working with is being a good screener and making use of that. And I think a lot of that, frankly, was just that he didn't have a good enough or a reliable enough passing option as a partner. And when you look at the way Harden is just weaponizing the way Embiid gets downhill. And I mean, we saw the and one with the celebration after yesterday that I think brought a smile to everyone's face. But there's so many ways to utilize it, and it's so cool. I mean, Harden talked about post game how they're pretty much winging it out there, and that he doesn't really know the plays yet. And just think about like when these guys start to really familiarize and what they can do, what they're looking for. It's going to be the sky's the limit, and what I really think can bring to this offense. And the offense as a whole has just been so refreshed with James Harden being a true point guard to run this. Because frankly, the Sixers have operated all year without a true point guard on roster. And I love Tyrese Maxey, but we're seeing how much more effective he is when he's freed of the roles of being a primary distributor and having to run the offense. And now that he can just relax and play basketball, I think we're going to see new levels of his game, which I'm super excited to watch happen. And it's just so awesome to see Harden just creating for others, pushing the pace. And there's been so many positive effects just as like a true point guard in the offense and the most talented guy that we've seen next to Joel. So it's thrilling to me. What do you think specifically about Maxi and how Harden's impacting him already?
Yeah, so that was something that I was actually wrong about. Just kind of predicting what this team would look like with Harden. I kind of thought that Maxi would be the guy kind of left out between Embiid, Harden, and Harris, and it's been Tobias Harris actually that is the one that's kind of adjusting, and I'm sure we'll touch on that then. But going back to Maxi, he's looked incredible. He's looked even better than what we've seen from him. When Embiid has been available, obviously he's popped off when Embiid hasn't. But that's been a huge thing. Is all of a sudden you got Tyrese Maxey, who is a bona fide third option, or at least for these past two games he has been. And it's really intriguing to see. He's playing his game out there. We know that while he can pass, that's not really his bread and butter. His bread and butter is being a three level scorer. And that's what he's been asked to do with Harden kind of running the show now, and he's been scoring efficiently. And there's a lot of sequences between the Minnesota and the Knicks game where Harden and Embiid would kind of go into a pick and roll, and the defense would collapse on them because there's so much pressure with those two guys. And Maxi has kind of been that bailout guy. He either takes the three or he drives in for a floater or finishing around the rim. And it's really been entertaining to see. And we'll see how sustainable that is. I think Maxi had like 28 against the Knicks and 25 or something like that against the Timberwolves. But it's been really, really impressive to see. And it makes me really optimistic for that backcourt. I'm really intrigued by it.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think the 3-point shooting is super key and Maxi's fit along the court, and him being willing to be a spot up shooter at the times is massive. I mean, he shot 2 of 3 in the Timberwolves game, 3 of 5 in the Knicks series, and I'm really just believing in that shot. He's up at 40% for the year on a legitimate like shot attempts per game, and I think we're going to see that continue to rise. It's awesome that I think this can form into a legitimate big three with Maxi and that he's ready for that moment. I mean, the three of them combined, Embiid, Harden, Maxi, scored 89 against the Timberwolves and 87 against the Knicks. That's 176 points over 2 games, which just is an absurd amount of production from 3 guys. And I mean, it's cool, especially with Maxi. And this is obviously due to Harden's influence as well. But you see, I feel like he's just kind of taking off more and being that push the pace and setting the tone. And we see like the full court pass, the 3-quarter pass from Harden. It's just like the offense is just clicking more. And I mean, to circle back, like on the season, the Sixers are averaging 23.2 assists per game. In both games, they've blown that number away. They had 30 assists on 42 made field goals against the Timberwolves and 28 assists on 38 made field goals against the Knicks. So just like the influence of Harden is just there were assists to be had in this offense and nobody to get it there. And I mean, Matisse is another guy being weaponized with his cutting in a way that like just frankly hasn't happened this year and hasn't throughout his whole career. So I think it's a credit to Matisse to get involved. And are there any other particular role players you think benefit from having Harden here?
Yeah, I think Thibault has been a really interesting one. We kind of didn't know what it was going to look like just because of how much of a liability he has been on offense. But the past 2 games have passed the eye test. He scored really well in the Timberwolves game. He scored in double digits, looked solid enough against the Knicks, and he brings that dynamic to the team that isn't really found anywhere else on the roster now with Ben gone and just being a willing and able cutter. So he's someone that's really benefited. Another person who I think is really going to benefit from the James Harden trade is George Niang. He's someone that all season long he's in there to shoot. He knows his role and he's going to go out there and do it. And he's arguably one of the most fearless shooters on this roster. If he gets the ball, he's looking to shoot right away. And that's extremely beneficial because this team has had and also still has some guys that are a little bit hesitant with shooting. That's something I think the entire roster just needs to work on. But Georges Niang is someone that he can do that now, and he has done that. He's been a big role player for them. We even saw him start in the Milwaukee game. Harden wasn't playing in that one, but he was huge in that one. So he's someone that I think is going to be really important as this Harden and Embiid partnership continues to grow.
Yeah, I love what George Niang brings to his team, and that Milwaukee game is kind of brushed over because it was right before the All-Star break and just obviously before Harden was playing. But that was a massive win for the Sixers team as well, and a statement win. And now, granted, I don't see George Niang locking up Giannis in a 7-game series or anything like that. But that was a very cool win that I think kind of gets lost in kind of the transition of everything. So I think that does deserve it credit. And as far as Niang specifically, I mean, just a guy that is just so willing to do his job and just be the catch and shoot. I think he's been a real upgrade on this bench and just what he brings to the team. And he's become a guy that like I trust to be willing to take the big shots for the Sixers, to have the guts to do it. And he's a guy that's just fearless. And also his just attitude and just the grittiness, I really think adds something to his team. So personally, I think Niang's a guy that's going to be firmly in this rotation. And do you agree with that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Coming into this season, I was kind of a little bit unsure of what his role would be, how defined it is, but he's arguably been their sixth man. It's not Shake Milton anymore. He's kind of on the outside looking in. So if you kind of look at the minutes and the role that he's playing in, he's basically the first guy off the bench, which is really impressive. And he's had a good season. He's really taken advantage of his role here in Philadelphia, and it makes me excited to see just how big he'll be coming down this home stretch and entering the postseason.
Yeah, and to switch gears a little bit, I mean, we've seen so much like I guess just excitement and good fitting in so far as Harden with the Sixers. A guy that it hasn't quite clicked with yet is Tobias Harris, and he does seem to be a little bit of the odd man out in this offense. Do you think there's a better way to get him involved or find utilization, or is this a concern basically, or is this just it's going to take a little time?
I think it was always going to take a little bit of time. Now, we got a 2 game sample size, which is
Yeah.
still really, really small. And Tobias has kind of struggled in those games offensively. Defensively, he was really good in the Minnesota game. And the next game, I thought he was fine on that end as well. But, that's kind of the question now because we've seen what Maxi can do alongside those two. He's been great. And now you got Tobias Harris, who, you've talked about it. I've talked about it. Everyone knows that he's not very decisive. He's not a quick decision maker. And that's going to be a problem because Harden's going to get you open. He's going to want you to take those open shots. And if you're, wide open and he passes you the ball, the last thing he wants is like a pump fake and jab step. Like he just wants you to shoot that thing. And towards the end of the Knicks game, he kind of hit some shots, but Tobias is going to need to kind of redefine his role with this team, and I think he can. I still think he can be a successful player alongside those two guys. I think it's just going to involve him doing two things really. One of them is shooting more than 5 threes a game. He's a talented shooter. He just doesn't shoot it enough, and that's what you want to see. That's what you wanted to see from him basically since he got to Philadelphia. But now more than ever, they're going to need that out of him. And then on the other end of the floor, Tobias says he's got a big body. He's mobile enough. And we've seen him when he's locked in, he can be a good defender. We saw in the Cavs game where he kind of was assigned Darius Garland. And at the time, everyone was like, are we sure about this? But it worked out well. And the same with the Minnesota game where he was put on Karl Anthony Towns and he held his own. So that's going to be the biggest thing for him going forward is just being a willing and able shooter,
Mhm.
and also locking down on defense. And I think that he can be a good third or fourth option if he's willing to accept that role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the 3-point shooting has been a concern since before Harden's been here. As far as this is a guy who shot 5 attempts from beyond the arc in his first 2 seasons with the Sixers, and we've seen that dip down to 3.4, which is just not. And especially with Harden, it's even more important that you just have to shoot the shots that are there. And I mean, I personally get super frustrated with just the pump fakes from three to dribble into a contested two, and I'm sure it's driving a lot of the Sixers around crazy. And with Harden specifically, like the shots are just there. And to give Toby some credit, he shot 2 of 6 in the T Wolves game, hit 2 threes. Then I think he will find himself as well. I'm not as concerned as some people. The thing I do want to say though is the scale for what we expect out of Tobias Harris just completely has to shift here. Like everybody get the contract out of their head. Everybody get the expectations that went with that out of the head. Only one guy can score per possession here. So if Tobias Harris is not averaging 20 points, that's not a bad thing for the Sixers team. And if Maxi's the guy that takes the leap ahead of him on the pecking order, which the early signs certainly look like that's going to be the case, that's totally fine as far as what he can still bring to this team. And I also have been very impressed with his defense. The Darius Garland game was particularly impressive to me. If he can do that on Karl Anthony Towns, and it's interesting schematically what the Sixers try to do there. And we've seen this. I saw a thing. The Celtics are doing a similar thing, but by having Toby on Cat and being able to follow him, like Karl Anthony Towns is a stretch big that's going to go out to the perimeter. You're allowing Embiid, who in this case it was Jared Vanderbilt, to kind of just let him be the guy that if you want to shoot it, that's fine. We'll live with that. But in other words, Embiid can still protect the rim, protect the paint. And by Toby being able to step up and be that guy that can defend guys, because he is an interesting kind of fit as far as his body, his frame, his mobility. It does cause some problems. He can match up with a lot of people, which is a great thing for the Sixers team. And he's obviously not to the level of what we saw Ben Simmons, but kind of a similar role in terms of creating flexibility for others and being able to take some defensive responsibility off. So if he could become that defensive stopper or at least a guy that can provide flexibility on this, he's absolutely helping the Sixers team. And do you think he can keep growing in that?
Yeah, absolutely can. And I've actually been a fan of kind of how Doc has shifted Embiid's defensive role.
Hmm.
Basically what you've said, Tobias has been tasked with guarding the mobile or the above average shooters, and Joel kind of goes on to one of the more shaky shooters, or maybe not one of the primary offensive options, and it allows him to be a help defender, allows him to rotate over, to contest or block a shot, and it's really been fun to see. It's kind of similar to what Milwaukee does with Giannis. In that Milwaukee game, Bobby Portis was the main guy on Joel, not Giannis. So I'm a big fan of it. I think it's nice. Tobias is big enough to at least contest a lot of these jumpers from bigger players. He's 6'9". You're talking about Cat, he's a 7-footer, and there's a size mismatch, but he's able to stick a hand up, and it does a little something. And I think that's valuable. So I definitely really love where Tobias is headed with that. And I think he can definitely grow with it, especially if he locks in, if he accepts that role and the team sits down with him and says, like, hey, we need you to lock in on defense, and it's going to be really valuable for us. And if you look down the Sixers roster, their wings don't have too much size.
Yeah.
Danny Green has played shooting guard the majority of his career. Furkan is not the beefiest guy, and Matisse is not the tallest guy. So having Tobias lock into that role is really crucial for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And to touch a little bit more on the wings, I mean, I guess I don't even want to call it a battle, but I guess for what you expect that last starting spot to be, do you think Matisse is the guy that sticks in the starting role, or do you think Danny Green eventually takes that role? And I even honestly think Georges Niang should have his name in this discussion as well. So what do you think about options for that last starting spot?
That's the tough question. They've rolled with Matisse, and I get why. They want his defense, and also offensively, he's grown as a cutter, and I think that's valuable. Now, the Knicks and the Timberwolves are fine teams. They're not very good, but we'll get that question answered kind of coming up in this 5-game stretch. They play the Knicks again, then I think they play the Heat, the Bulls, some of the top teams in the league, and that's where you'll really get a chance to see one of the better coached teams and one of the more talented teams. How do they look with Matisse in the starting five? So that's where they'll get their answer. But I do agree with Doc's approach in starting with Thibault. And I get it. Everyone is just like, oh, Danny Green makes more sense. And he does on paper. He's a quick catch and shoot guy. He can still somewhat hold his own defensively. I get that. But I think the whole process of kind of determining that starting with Thibault is really beneficial because you can just plug Danny Green in tomorrow. The
Yeah.
team will look fine. Thibault, it isn't really that necessarily. He has a bit of a different game plan, cutting to the rim, being in the dunker spot. So, if this whole Thibault thing blows up in their face, it's fine. They can just put Danny Green in the starting five. I don't think there would be many issues with that. But I do like the idea of seeing what you got in Thibault, who is better than Danny defensively right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of look at this as like a little bit of like a swing for the fence approach on like if this all clicks. And I think the hope for Thibault all along, and I even think bringing in Danny Green was to help with this, was so he could eventually jump him and be that guy and be that legitimate starter. I don't think he's quite gotten there yet, but he's certainly taking strides. And I do think it's a credit to Matisse, especially with the cutting, for how he's finding ways to utilize himself offensively. Because I mean, it's been disappointing. The 3-pointers have not quite progressed in the way that the Sixers fans and me personally have hoped. But I don't think he's a lost cause. Like even with him not hitting at the highest rate, he's still a more willing shooter than some guys on the roster. Which to me, I'll take his progress. I know it's a squinted way to look at it, but I will take it. And like you said, it's much easier to transition from Matisse to Danny Green than it is from Danny Green to Matisse, just because he is such a unique kind of niche player in that way. So there would be no hurt if it is Danny Green, the guy that is thrown back in there. And frankly, I think that's pretty likely to be the case. I also, there's an aspect of me that likes having Matisse as kind of like the reverse 6-man that you can just throw off the bench and kind of switch things up, throw at a guy. I think that's effective, and it's very different from pretty much anything that's ever been seen before as far as a way to coach like that. Like he's such just like a literally reverse 6-man in the way that he's just all defense, no offense in a way. And I hope he gets there, but it is going to be interesting to see. And outside of Matisse is really the concern in the wings, because when you look down and think about matchups, I think that's the one area that the Sixers roster is still missing. If they had a large athletic wing or a guy that can be switchable, a guy that just can match up better defensively or is more complete all around. Do you think that's going to be a concern come playoff time, or do you think there's enough outside of that to cover up for it?
Yeah, so the Sixers wings are pretty one-dimensional. Matisse is a defensive-minded guy, really good defensively, kind of shaky offensively. Furkan is supposed to be the offensive guy with not much defense, but apart from a few games at the beginning of the season, he's just had an incredibly disappointing season. I don't know. He had that wrist injury. I don't know if that's still hampering him. That's just speculation, but you know, it's been a rough season from him. And Danny's kind of the guy in the equator of those two, the guy in the middle who can give you some passable defense and hit threes. And Father Time's kind of catching up to him. He's also had some injury concerns. So yeah, and going even further than that, you got Charlie Brown Jr., who Doc loves. Defensively, I think he's fine, and offensively, it's so yeah, it's a little bit underwhelming and concerning with those wings, especially when you're dealing with a backcourt of Maxi and Harden. Harden is a better defender than I think his rep gets. I think when engaged, and he has been engaged these past two games, he's a passable defender, and I would even argue better than Seth Curry. I think he's easier to hide on defense because he's bigger. He's taller. It's just easier to do that. And Maxi has had really good defensive games, but the defensive consistency is still kind of iffy for him in his career. So you want those defensive-minded wings, but at the same time, you got to have guys that hit shots. So unless Thibault just completely turns it around and goes on an insane tear, I'm not really entirely sure what the long-term answer is, especially around that backcourt.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it will be interesting to see play out. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching as the rest of the season progresses before we go in, and playoffs will be when it real counts. So we will find out. To switch gears again a little bit here, the thing that has already drawn some criticism nationally about the Sixers, and something I just expect to continue, is just the amount of time the Sixers are clocking at the free throw line. So they shot 30 of 36 in the T-Wolves game, 39 of 44 in the Knicks game. In the Knicks game, Embiid was 23 for 27, which are both career highs for him. I mean, frankly, personally, this is something we're just going to absolutely have to get used to seeing. The Sixers were already number one in the league as far as percentage of points from the free throw line prior to the Harden trade. And with Harden, who's one of the all-time greats at drawing fouls, getting to the line, this just had to be expected. So Harrison, do you think this is still a sustainable way of winning and something just brush over the criticism, or what are your thoughts on this overall?
Yeah, I mean, as you said before, these are two guys that are historically great at drawing fouls and getting to the line. And when you put them on the same team with each other, it's going to cause even more pressure to opposing defenses. So these guys are going to get fouled. They're going to get hit. And in the Knicks game, it was something else. Like I was bracing myself for that, but I kind of realized just how long the game was going. And the Knicks shot a lot of free throws too, albeit.
Yeah,
Um, but I remember looking at like the clock and I was like, this game has been on for like 2.5 hours and there's still like 5 minutes left to go. And NBA games are like typically like 2 hours, 15 minutes roughly, I would say, without overtime. So yeah, I think it's definitely a sustainable way of winning. And I get the free throw shooting. It's not the most fun thing to watch. If I was playing against this team, I would probably hate it too. I understand that. But when it comes to that, drawing fouls is a skill, and it's not the most watchable basketball out there. But I would say don't hate the player, hate the game with that type of thing. And the NBA has kind of adjusted rules to change what is and what isn't drawing a foul. But we've seen Joel draw fouls at a career high rate. So Sixer fans got to get used to it. It's going to be painful for those 10 p.m. tips, I'm sure. It's going to be
yeah,
like 1 a.m. and people are going to be shooting free throws. But, it is a sustained way of winning. I definitely think that you can go into the postseason where it's a lot more high stakes, a lot more high strung. There's not possessions where teams or players are taken off. So I definitely think that going into the postseason, I definitely think it's sustainable, and I definitely think it's going to be important to the Sixers.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Sixers games are a marathon, not a sprint from now on. Absolutely, and something that is going to have to be adjusted with there. But like you said, like this shouldn't be brushed over as a criticism in the way that and for the most part, both Harden and Embiid really do get fouled and like earn their way to the line, and it is just artful in the way that they create contact, find a way. You see the the way he like scoops under with his arms, which is a similar way to Embiid, and they both, you can see the influence of each other on each other's game, which is already very cool, and that dates back to prior to them being teammates, of course. But it really is like sustainable I'm all about it. I'm bought into the effects of it. And the thing that really does kind of appeal to me, is very interesting to me, is the free throw line seems to be the one place where there's like a neutral meeting ground between like the analytical and the basketball minds, in terms of, we've heard like the basketball phrases about like leaving free points out there and that kind of thing. And then when you just look at the analytics, like this is the best shot in the game as far as efficiency, the way you can make it, and just a free 2 points of possession when you're at the line like that. So to capitalize on that, to take advantage of that, and I expect the Sixers to pretty much be declaring war on trying to win the free throw line on a nightly basis. That's a way to win, and that's a way we bought in. And to your point about this being towards the postseason, I mean, I don't want to rip open too many wounds, but to think back to that Hawks series, as the Hawks are intentionally sending Simmons to the line and declaring that kind of like literal mental warfare on Ben, as far as like just tearing him down. We now have two guys who not only get to the line, but capitalize on it at a really high rate. And for James Harden specifically, it was such a hindrance to the Sixers for Ben Simmons to be the guy who is known as the guy that runs the offense, your primary ball handler, and to not be able to put the ball in his hands in crunch time. That's that absolutely changes things for a team, and is so detrimental in the way that it just takes away so much. So to have James Harden now be the guy that you can just confidently put it in his hand, let him get to the line, that changes everything late in games and moving into postseason. And even beyond that, like there were several moments in these last two games where the ball kind of shifted around. It hit that late in the shot clock. It fell to James Harden's hand, and it's just kind of like, all right, time to hit a step back three in your face. And just like the fact that that's now an element of this Sixers offense, because we've seen it before where it gets down to that end of shot clock and it just simply has not looked like the Sixers know what to do. Is who can shoot this? It's kind of a little bit of like a hot potato. Like we've seen the just end of barely getting off behind the shot clock, just bad looks. And to have that, like, I guess just safe haven of give it to Harden and let him do his thing, create the isolation, I think is so huge. And I think that's going to be put on full display in the playoffs.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, you're talking about guys that have complete opposites in terms of just on court gravity. You got Embiid around the rim, where if he's posting up or facing up around the rim, all eyes are on him. The defense collapses into the paint. Then you got James Harden, who is famous for commending basically half or double teams at half court. And I get he's older, he's not necessarily that guy anymore, but he's still a damn good player, as we've seen from the past two games. So it's going to be so fun to see that, because James hasn't necessarily really had a teammate like Joel. He's had Kevin Durant, but I think Joel is a lot more dependent or a lot more crafty at drawing free throws than Kevin Durant is. And Joel's obviously never had a teammate like James Harden. So it's going to be fun to see. And I get it that, the Sixers are going to kind of embrace this villain role, just getting to the line a bajillion times. And, we got to get used to it. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm all about that too. I'm all about embracing the villain role for the Sixers, and it's been so fascinating to me, just kind of the national take on all this. And I think it went from a pretty direct kind of like, we saw the Daryl Morey has to make a trade. Daryl Morey like has to get Joel some help, get Ben Simmons out of there, make something happen. To then them getting James Harden, like James Harden, the one that's been MVP of this league, the 4-time scoring champ, 10-time All Star, James Harden, and then the reaction just seemed to be like the Sixers gave up too much, or the Nets are so good now. It just has never quite made sense to me. And I think to just watch Harden in this offense and to see like, wow, this is still James Harden, no matter what people are saying, what are trying to make. Like James Harden and Joel Embiid are now up there in the top tier duos of the NBA. And I think that will continue to be put on full display. And I mean, I don't even want to worry about the Nets yet. Like I think that's destined to be a playoff series, just because there's too many storylines, too much bubbling, and I'm looking forward to it. But I think one of my frustrations with this Sixers team and building of rosters, and again, a lot of this is somewhat tied to Ben Simmons, but I feel like they've been built for the regular season in their style of play, the way they like what they relied on, and just where the holes in the roster were. And I just don't feel that way on the way this roster is constructed anymore. Like when the game slows down, when it becomes the half court, the reliance that we have on free throws, the able to create, I just think this is like the Harden and Embiid duo is where it's at. And a cool stat, shout out Jackson Frank for tweeting this out as well. In the 46 games without James Harden, Embiid was assisted on 49.4% of his baskets. In the 2 games with Harden, Embiid has been assisted on 82.4% of his baskets. So just having a guy that you can create for like Embiid has. There's been times where Embiid just looks like startled to have the ball, and that's just like so cool. The fact that it's getting him to that spots, and like I don't think this should be like this. I think should only help to elevate Embiid's game, and I'm just thrilled with it. I'm thrilled to see what's going to happen with it, and I guess my question to you would be: do you think where does this rank amongst the league's duos? Do you have any idea on that?
I today there was a segment on ESPN where some guy, I don't even know who it was, but he was like, they're not even a top 5 duo in the East, and I'm
Yeah.
like who are you thinking? Like I don't get it. But anyway, going back to the initial question at hand. That I think they're right at the top. I think there's only a few duos that can really match up and really compete with them. I think you got Brooklyn with a full-time Kyrie, that is, and healthy Kevin Durant. I think they have an argument in that case. Healthy LeBron and AD. Obviously, the Lakers have been just bad. It's
Mhm.
been a really bad year for them. So and AD's also hurt. But apart from that, I'm not entirely sure. I would say if they're not at the top, or if they aren't the top, then they're definitely really close to it. They're definitely top 5. I would comfortably say top 3. And then you also got Maxi and Tobias Harris, and those are two talented players next to them. So my personal belief is I would put them at 1 or 2, just if we're talking about strictly duos, not comparing them to big threes or things along those lines. But undoubtedly, I think they're top 3 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, personally, I have them at the top of my list, and maybe that's a little Homer influence there, but I really do just believe, like looking at these, it's been shocking to me the concern, I guess, about like how it's not going to work or the fit's not there. Like to me, it's been obvious, and I think we're seeing it right away. Like this is very complimentary in the way, and I think Harden and Embiid already are proving to be more complimentary than like the Simmons and Embiid that we've kind of tried to hammer a square peg into a round hole for years. So I'm looking forward there. Like you mentioned earlier, this is a very important stretch for the Sixers as far as like if they hope to climb the East, they have many big games coming up. So at home against the Knicks on Wednesday, then they play the Cavs on Friday, the Heat on Saturday, the Bulls on Monday, and then the Nets on Thursday. So five big games there. 4 out of the 5 are real like pretty heavyweight Eastern Conference rivals, and then the Knicks as well. No disrespect. So what are your predictions for these next 5 games?
It's gonna be interesting to see. I gotta look. How many of those games are away or home? Do you know?
Knicks is home, Cavs is home. The only away game is at the Heat.
Oh, okay. So that's
Mhm.
interesting. Uh, I think that they'll probably go something along the lines of 3-2, and people are going to hear me say that and be like, "What? Like they got Harden and Bede? Like how do they not just 5-0 or 4-1 them?" And you got to realize, and we got to eventually come back down to reality at some point. Good teams just play well, and if they get hot, they win. And the Sixers haven't been as good at home as they have been in the past. They've been good this year, but not quite as dominant as they have before. So I think that they should hopefully win and take advantage of those first 2 games against the Knicks and Cavs. I think um, well, not really the Knicks, but the Cavs I think are a good team, but they're a little bit banged up, and they're not quite to the level of some of those other teams that you listed. So I think they can take advantage of that. And then if they steal one of those next 3 games, I think going 3-2 over that stretch is pretty good. So that's what I would lean to, I think, with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't think the Cavs are a team that should be slouched at by any means, especially when talking about the Sixers. Like the Cavs live for just length, athleticism, switchability, size. They really do a very good job just like clogging things up defensively, just having a lot of hands, a lot of area covered on that. So they are a team that in the postseason I would prefer not to match up with, and a little bit scary there. So they deserve a ton of credit for how good they've been, and Darius Garland is tremendous as well. So they very good team there, but I think my prediction, I think there is a 4-1 for the Sixers here. I think we take the Bulls. We've already beat them this year twice, I believe. I
Three,
think we
3 times, 3 and
three
0.
times. Yeah, look at
Yeah.
that. And then the Nets game, I just cannot see us losing. I think there's going to be such like a locked in moment from both Joel and James Harden in that, which I'm very excited for. So I know that's the game everyone's got circled. That's still a little bit away, but I think over this next 5 game span, I think it's 4-1. And I really think that we're in the start of like, for sure, there will be some comeback to reality moments, but I think this is the point for where the Sixers kind of hit their stride as far as being legitimate threats, proving themselves, and continuing to climb up the East. I mean, to be at third place without James Harden and to be 2.5 games out of the top spot in the East without a true point guard all year, and then to add a guy of Harden's caliber, I think it's time to make a statement. So I think the Sixers are getting hot, and I'm ready to ride with it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I think the Nets game is going to be the one that everyone has their calendar circled on, and injuries also are going to play a part into
Yeah.
this. Darius Garland is out right now with a sore back, so is he going to be available for the Sixers game? And if he isn't, they don't have a point guard because Rondo's also hurt. So I think that's a big factor. And obviously in Brooklyn, who knows what's going on with Ben Simmons and his apparent back injury, and if Kevin Durant's going to return at that point. So obviously, if all those guys are out, those are extremely winnable games that you can take advantage of. If they're in, they're going to be a lot more competitive and fun to watch. So I think that's a big factor as well.
Yeah, and I guess the bottom line here is like it just things are taking a positive swing here in Philly, and I do think the James Harden era is here and should be noted. So I'm all in on what the Sixers are doing. And Harrison, I appreciate you coming on today and talking with me. Where can everybody find you at? And let them know what you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. It's good to talk about good Philadelphia slash Sixer things. This season has been quite a long haul for a lot of people, and not just fans but writers included, and writing down Ben stuff that wasn't really news but is. So I'm glad that we can kind of witness this team and witness how fun it is and kind of reap the benefits of that. So it's been great talking with you. You can find me on Twitter at Harrison_Grimm with 2 M's. And you can find my work on Liberty Ballers as well as my newsletter on Substack, which is in the bio of my Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said there, like it's felt like all season it's been like the what's going on with the Sixers and then what's going on with Ben Simmons. And it's like
Yep.
two kind of separate things that we're covering. So it's very nice to just have one team. This is the 76ers and this is what we got going on. So I'm thrilled with it. I'm ready to ride. You guys make sure you check out at Harrison_Grimm on Twitter. Awesome Twitter file, and you can see everything else you got going on. And I will talk to you guys next time.